Thanksgiving in my family has always been a ritual of forced smiles and simmering resentments. But that particular year, it felt like stepping onto a stage where every wrong glance, every clipped word, every past grievance would be magnified under the yellow kitchen lights. Still, nothing could have prepared me for the moment my sister Lily, radiant in her carefully curated outfit and hungry for attention like a starved actress, clinked her wine glass against a fork and announced to the entire room that I, quiet, unassuming, overly private Maddie, had inherited precisely $12.6 million from a man my family barely remembered existed. The moment she said it, the world seemed to tilt. Forks froze midair, mouths hung open, and the air thickened with shock so potent I could practically feel it pressing against my skin. I sat there, trapped between my mother's trembling excitement and my father's stunned calculation, feeling the floor disappear beneath me as Lily smiled with that bright, poisonous sweetness she always reserved for moments she wanted to own. "Isn't it amazing?" she chirped, as if she had delivered wonderful news rather than detonating a bomb over the dinner table. My mother gasped and clutched her chest as though my silence had personally wounded her. My father leaned forward, narrowing his eyes like he was evaluating a business proposition rather than looking at his daughter. And Lily kept talking. God, she wouldn't stop talking, painting me as secretive, ungrateful, disloyal for keeping something so important from the family, when the truth was that the inheritance terrified me, overwhelmed me, confused me in ways I hadn't been ready to share. I had barely processed it myself, how Dr. Teller, my mentor from years ago, the only person who ever saw potential in me without demanding anything in return, had left everything to me because I had once been kind to him, because I had listened when no one else did, because he believed I would use the money in a way that mattered. But sitting at that table, none of that mattered to the people around me. All they saw were dollar signs attached to my name. My mother was the first to recover from the shock, leaning across the table with trembling excitement. "This is wonderful news, sweetheart. You can finally help us with the house." Then my father chimed in with, "And your sister's loans, we should clear those right away. Keeping debt in the family is unnecessary now." The word "now" burned like acid. And then Lily, of course it was Lily, leaned forward, placing her perfectly manicured nails on my arm and said, "I just know you'll help me with a new car, or maybe even a down payment on a condo. I mean, it's not like it's a big deal anymore, right?" Her voice dropped to a whisper only I could hear. "You're welcome." That was when the humiliation turned to fury. Not loud, fiery rage, but a slow, cold, tightening coil in my chest. They weren't congratulating me. They were auditing me. They weren't happy for me. They were calculating what percentage of my inheritance they believed belonged to me. The questions came rapid fire, dizzying. "Why didn't you tell us? When were you planning to? How much have you spent? Have you spoken to a financial planner? Can we trust you to manage something so large?" I tried answering, explaining I hadn't processed it yet, that I was overwhelmed, that I wasn't hiding it out of malice, but my words dissolved under the weight of their expectations. My mother cried, not out of joy, but betrayal. My father grew stern, lecturing me about responsibility. A cousin I barely spoke to muttered something about fairness, and Lily watched it all with a triumphant gleam in her eyes, as though she had staged the entire moment for her own entertainment. When dinner ended, plates still half full and dessert untouched, my family swarmed me like salesmen, each pitching their personal emergencies as if I were obligated to solve them. I stood there, nodding mechanically, drowning in their demands, feeling the walls close in until the night itself blurred. But when Lily cornered me in the kitchen, when she smirked and said, "You can't hoard something like that, Maddie. Family comes first, and you owe me more than anyone," the last pieces of my shock crystallized into something sharper, something cold, something dangerous. I stared at her and saw with perfect clarity that this wasn't about family at all. It was about control. It was about her lifelong need to outshine me, to own the narrative of who I was allowed to be. She didn't reveal my inheritance to celebrate me. She revealed it to trap me. And as she walked out of the kitchen, humming as if she hadn't detonated my life, I felt the first flicker of resolve ignite beneath my ribs, a quiet, smoldering promise that whatever happened next, whatever storm she thought she unleashed, the final act of this story would not belong to her. It would belong to me.
In the days following that disastrous Thanksgiving, the fallout spread like an oil slick across every corner of my life, staining conversations, texts, and even the silence between notifications. Suddenly, everyone seemed to believe that my bank account was a communal resource and my emotional boundaries were mere suggestions, flimsy things meant to be pushed aside for the greater good of the family, though really it was just code for their personal convenience. My mother sent me a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet, itemizing bills she thought I might want to pay, each highlighted cell a reminder that in her mind, my inheritance wasn't mine, but an overdue family fund. My father began calling every morning, pretending to check on my well-being, only to pivot into casual remarks like, the roof needs fixing soon, or your cousin Angela is drowning in loans, it might be good for you to help her before things get worse. Even people I barely knew, an aunt who never remembered my birthday, a cousin who once mocked my career sent long, sugary messages about how family sticks together and how sharing blessings is the mark of true character. But nothing compared to Lily, who transformed overnight from smug saboteur to relentless parasite. She messaged me with links to luxury apartments for us to look at together, designer clothes she thought I should buy her, and screenshots of her credit card balances, accompanied by emojis pretending to be embarrassed. When I didn't respond fast enough, she sent voice notes dripping with fake concern. I just want to make sure you're not isolating yourself. You know how you get. When I called her out for that, she switched tactics: guilt, pity, manipulation in its purest form. I've always supported you, she claimed, conveniently forgetting the years she belittled my choices, mocked my job, and treated my successes like accidents. When guilt didn't work, she escalated. She showed up at my apartment without warning, pounding on the door, demanding to talk, acting as though she had the right to trespass into my space simply because she shared my blood. I didn't let her in. The moment she realized I was done being easily accessed was the moment her entitlement cracked, revealing the panic beneath. She left angry voicemails, each one wobbling between hurt and hostility. "You're shutting out your own family. Who does that?" Followed by, "You think you're too good for us now." Followed by, "Just admit you're being dramatic and spoiled." But beneath her fury, I could hear the fear. The fear that she was losing the control she thought she had secured with her little Thanksgiving performance. And that fear became fuel for me. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, I began quietly building the kind of life where their claws couldn't reach me. I hired a financial advisor, someone completely outside the family, someone with no emotional ties or expectations. I made sure the inheritance was protected, structured, and locked behind barriers they could not manipulate. I took time off work, not to travel or indulge myself, but to breathe, to think, to piece myself together without their noise dictating who I should become. Then slowly, deliberately, I created distance. Physical distance, emotional distance, conversational distance. I stopped answering the phone every time it rang. I replied to messages with short, neutral responses. I set boundaries so quiet and firm that even Lily couldn't pretend she didn't hear them. And when she tried to twist my withdrawal into selfishness, claiming, "You're abandoning us just because you got lucky," I didn't take the bait. Instead, I let her words fall flat in the space between us. As the silence grew, she became unhinged, sending increasingly urgent messages about how unfair I was being. But something in me had shifted permanently. Their expectations no longer felt like obligations, just impositions I no longer planned to entertain. The more I pulled back, the clearer everything became. They weren't angry because I hid the inheritance. They were angry because they believed they were entitled to it, entitled to me, entitled to shape my life like I was an extension of theirs rather than a person with her own future. And Lily, despite her theatrics, her tears, her accusations, was the most transparent of all. She didn't want me. She wanted what she could extract from me. She wanted to tether me to her forever with guilt and dependency. But each day that I didn't cave, each hour I didn't respond, each boundary I set was another piece of power returning to me. My therapist, after hearing the entire situation, said something that clung to me like a truth I'd been waiting my entire life to hear. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always see your boundaries as hostility. Lily saw my boundaries as betrayal, and that was the clearest sign I was finally doing something right. By the end of that second week, when her messages shifted from anger to pitiful pleas, "I need you, I'm struggling, why are you being so cruel?" I felt no guilt, only clarity. I understood that love isn't measured by how much of yourself you surrender. It's measured by how much you allow yourself to remain whole. And for the first time in years, I felt something like wholeness forming inside me. Small but steady, a quiet ember glowing beneath the wreckage of all their expectations. That was the moment I knew. Lily may have won Thanksgiving, but the war for my life, the actual story of who I would become, was only just beginning, and I was the one writing it. Moving out became the first real declaration that I was reclaiming my life, though I made the decision with a quiet certainty rather than a dramatic flourish. I found an apartment 2 towns over, tucked beside a lake with water so still it looked like glass in the mornings, a place where no one knew me, where no one could drop in uninvited, where my name wasn't tied to a rumor of sudden wealth. Signing the lease felt like shedding a skin I'd been forced to live in for years. When I packed, I took only what mattered: books, clothes, a few mementos, the plants I'd kept alive through loneliness, and left behind anything that felt tied to obligation. The day I moved, I didn't tell my parents or Lily. I didn't want their opinions, their guilt, or their sense of entitlement bleeding into my fresh start. I just left. And for the first time in months, my phone stayed quiet, at least for a little while. When Lily eventually realized my location had changed, because I disabled location sharing, not that she had any right to track me in the first place, her reaction came fast and frantic. "Where did you go? Why didn't you tell me? Are you okay?" Messages buzzed one after another, each one laced with growing panic as if my independence were an attack on her survival. I answered none of them. That silence, more than the inheritance itself, unhinged her. She called repeatedly, left voicemails in escalating tones, first pleading, then angry, then mocking, then pitying herself for being the only one who really cares about me. Meanwhile, I settled into my new space. I woke up to water shimmering through my window instead of my mother's demands or Lily's passive-aggressive monologues. I took long walks, letting cold air clear the pressure that had been suffocating me since Thanksgiving. I saw my financial advisor weekly and learned how to manage the inheritance without letting it manage me. And slowly I began to breathe like someone who finally understood the value of peace. My therapist helped me recognize how deeply my family's patterns had rooted themselves in me. Not just the guilt, but the belief that I owed everyone my constant availability, my emotional labor, my success, my sanity. She said something that hit me like a revelation I'd been circling for years. "You're not abandoning them, you're letting them face the consequences of their behavior." That one sentence became my anchor. When Lily's messages turned into accusations, "You think you're better than me," I didn't bite. When she tried guilt, "After everything I've done for you, this is how you treat me," I didn't respond. When she tried manipulation, "If you don't help me, I'll fall apart and it'll be your fault," I let the silence protect me rather than rushing in to absorb her chaos like I always had. And when she tried the final, oldest weapon, playing victim, I recognized the tactic clearly for the first time. She wrote, "I don't have anyone else. You know how fragile I am. You're hurting me more than you know." But suddenly, it was crystal clear. She didn't feel abandoned. She felt powerless. She wasn't scared of losing me. She was scared of losing access to what I could give her. Meanwhile, my parents weren't much better. My mother called and cried about how I was drifting away, as if I had floated off by accident rather than intentionally freeing myself. My father tried to guilt me about family unity while hinting at new repairs he hoped I'd fund. I spoke to them, but carefully, measuredly, in ways that didn't give them openings for extraction. "I can't help with that" became my default sentence. Each time I said it, they grew more uncomfortable, as if I were breaking a rule they had written decades ago. Lily, however, refused to give up. She escalated from texts to emails, from emails to long, rambling calls in which she alternated between despair and rage. "You're treating me like I'm nothing," she said once, voice cracking. I didn't say it, but the truth was she had treated me like nothing for years. Nothing but a tool, a comparison point, an emotional punching bag. Then came the day she crossed the final line. She showed up at my apartment building unannounced, buzzing my unit repeatedly, pounding on the glass downstairs until the building manager threatened to call the police. That was when I realized the depth of her desperation. Not out of love, not out of concern, but out of fear that she was losing control of the narrative she had crafted for years, that she was the strong one, the charming one, the deserving one, and I was the timid, lesser sibling who should be grateful for her attention. Losing that dynamic was unraveling her. A week later, I saw her from my window, standing in the parking lot, staring at the building as if she could will herself inside. She looked lost, but not the kind of lost born of entitlement finally meeting resistance. She sent one final message. "Why are you doing this to me?" And the answer formed clearly in my mind. Because I am finally doing something for myself. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. I simply turned off my phone, made tea, and sat by the lake as the sun set across the water, realizing that power didn't look like confrontation. It looked like silence. It looked like distance. It looked like a life no longer dictated by guilt. And for the first time, I felt the shape of my own autonomy. Not sharp, not angry, but solid, grounded, mine.
The final break didn't come as an explosion, but as a quiet threshold I stepped over one rainy Tuesday evening. A moment so deceptively simple that, if not for Lily's trembling voice and the storm-muted light behind her, I might not have recognized it as the ending of an entire chapter of my life. She appeared in the hallway of my building, soaked from the downpour, mascara smudged, hair tangled, her expression teetering between panic and rage. And before I could open my mouth, she pushed her way inside my apartment as if she still had that right. She paced the living room, dripping water onto the rug, her movements sharp and frantic. "You can't keep doing this," she snapped. "You can't just cut me out." Her voice cracked on the last word, but not with grief, more like disbelief that her old tactics no longer worked. I stood by the door, calm in a way I never had been in her presence before, the stillness of my new life settling around me like armor. "I didn't cut you out," I said evenly. "I set boundaries." She scoffed at the word, as if boundaries were childish or absurd. "You're not the type to have boundaries," she spat. "You don't get to act like some cold, detached stranger because you suddenly have money." And there it was again, her belief that my self-worth and my wealth were interchangeable, that I had no identity beyond what she could extract or manipulate. She stepped closer, eyes shining with a volatile mixture of desperation and hostility. "You owe me," she whispered, each word laced with long-held resentment. "Everything I did for you growing up? You were the weird one, the quiet one, the one with no friends. I made sure you fit in. I helped you. And this is how you repay me?" For a moment, I simply looked at her. Really looked at her. Not at the sister I once hoped she would be, but at the woman she had chosen to become. Someone who needed control like oxygen. Someone who believed affection was a transaction. Someone who interpreted my independence as cruelty because she had relied on my compliance for so long. "Lily," I said softly, "you didn't help me. You monitored me. You corrected me. You kept me small because it made you feel bigger. That's not love." She blinked, stunned, as if no one in her life had ever dared to name her behavior. The silence between us thickened, but it wasn't mine to fill. She shook her head and backed away, voice trembling. "So what now? You just walk away from your family? From me?" I felt a strange, almost serene clarity wash over me. I'm walking away from being controlled. I'm walking away from being manipulated. I'm walking away from the version of me that let you decide what I owed. She stared at me with wide, wounded eyes. But the wound wasn't grief. It was the gaping hole carved out when entitlement finally hits a wall. She turned toward the door slowly, as if her body resisted the idea of leaving without victory. Her voice was small when she said, "I never thought you'd do this to me." I didn't say it out loud, but the truth was, she had never given me the chance to do anything else.
When the door closed behind her, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt reclaimed. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the soft hum of the rain and the quiet steadiness of my own breath, realizing that this, right here, was the first time in my life I had chosen myself without apology. The days that followed were unexpectedly peaceful. I told my parents directly, but gently, that I would help in small, structured ways, not as their fixer, not as their safety net, but as a daughter with limits. They didn't like it, but they adjusted, mostly because my firmness left no room for negotiation. Lily, on the other hand, went silent. No messages, no surprise visits, no guilt-laced pleas. At first I wondered if she was plotting another emotional ambush, but eventually I realized the truth. She wasn't silent because she understood. She was silent because she didn't know what to do with a version of me she couldn't influence. And strangely, that silence, her silence, was the greatest peace I had ever experienced. With the inheritance, I did things I believed would have made Dr. Teller proud. I funded a scholarship in his name for students who reminded me of the person I used to be. Quiet, overlooked, brimming with potential no one bothered to see. I created a small foundation for mental health resources in my hometown. I used some of the money to secure my own future, not extravagantly, but intentionally. And through every step, I made choices because they aligned with my values, not because someone tugged at my guilt. Months passed, seasons changed. I learned to enjoy my solitude, not as in isolation, but as autonomy. And one crisp morning, as I sat beside the lake watching mist lift from the water like a soft veil, it occurred to me that revenge had come in the quietest form possible. Not through confrontation, not through cruelty, but with peace. Peace Lily could not access, could not influence, could not contaminate. True revenge wasn't making her suffer. It was proving she no longer had the power to shape me. I wasn't the meek sister she could push around anymore. I wasn't the family's emotional accountant. I wasn't the girl who shrank so others could feel large. I was someone with boundaries, with purpose, with self-respect she could never take credit for. And that, I realized, was the victory. A life lived on my terms, untouched by the hands that once molded me. My $12.6 million hadn't changed me. Choosing myself had. And in the quiet ripple of the lake, in the stillness of my own reclaimed existence, I understood something Lily never would. Peace is the sharpest form of justice.